cheers to you. And cheers to the Salon.
Always.
Cheers to a prolific author, too, who we'll be discussing today.
Probably.
Certainly.
George Orwell.
George Orwell. All is well with Orwell, but not quite. Because a lot of Orwell's literature and literary outlook has to do with themes of totalitarianism, authoritarianism, repression, especially this book we're looking at today, which
Completely.
is...
He's very well known, right? Because he'd written 1984.
Yes.
Everybody knows, most people know 1984, right?
Especially during the COVID pandemic period, a lot of people were making references to that book in reference to authoritarianism.
But what is less known is his masterpiece, Animal Farm.
I would say.
And we should discuss that today.
That is the subject of today's discussion.
Animal Farm is a great book. That's why we're talking about it in the Friday Salon.
Otherwise, we wouldn't talk about
We
it.
have great taste. And it's a book that discusses political change, recycling even, political recycling. It's the story of a farm in England called the Manor Farm. Now, it's interesting, right, the name the Manor Farm.
Because who lives in a manor, ultimately?
Aristocrats.
Aristocrats, people
Yes.
with wealth, people who have land that they have inherited, people with titles.
Rulers.
Rulers live in farms.
At a certain scale, yes.
Yes, you know. And so, like you said, this book is about changing political order.
Yes.
It's a book about a group of animals who overthrow their human leaders on that oppressive manor farm.
Okay.
And they changed the name of the farm to Animal Farm, hence the name of the book.
Very
now,
nice.
if Manor Farm represents and emblemizes aristocracy and landed elite, ownership, titles, and nobility, Animal Farm represents then proletarianism, represents the mass of people.
Let's get a bit of context, as usual.
Let's do it.
First of all, Orwell was writing at a period that was kind of decisive, right? It was
I would say.
during the aftermath of the two
Second
World Wars, right?
Yes. The immediate aftermath.
So what happened in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War?
Well, Orwell is writing in a period that just saw the defeat of fascism. Nazi Germany had just been defeated. Imperial Japan had just been defeated. Same with Italy. The only prevailing ideologies left in that day were the liberalism of the United States with an economic model of free market capitalism, and then the communism that was prevailing in that USSR sphere of the world with a command economy.
So what started right after the Second World War? The Cold War, right? It was more an ideological war. It ended up with George Kennan's policy of containment, of advancing your pawns instead of attacking directly the king.
That's interesting, yes.
Attacking pawns instead of attacking the royals.
Yes.
So George Orwell has written that book in the political context of the beginning of the Cold War.
I really like what you said there, attacking with pawns rather than with kings.
Attacking with pawns and attacking the pawns.
Exactly, which means proxy wars.
Proxy wars.
This is not a warfare based on land and possessions, it's a warfare based on ideology.
That is why it's a cold war, right? It's not a hot war, it's not like guns blazing. It's a war that's by proxy. It's by smaller players having a war for the bigger ones.
I would also say in the theme of Cold War, rather than guns blazing, as you said, propaganda, ideology, and culture.
Spiritual war.
It's a spiritual war.
Completely.
It's a war for the souls of the mass of people.
Exactly. So we have capitalism fighting communism.
Yes.
And in that context, George Orwell, the British author, wrote Animal Farm. So let's discuss the story first.
Yes.
So we have a farm in England. The farm is called the Manor Farm, as you've just said. The manor is the home of the aristocrats, the ruling class at a certain scale.
Who in this story, this allegory, are humans.
Yes. So the farm is owned by humans, like every farm, right? Now, what's interesting is that Orwell imitates Jean-Baptiste Poquelin.
He does.
Molière.
Molière.
So let's understand that. Molière wrote in a political turmoil, right? He wanted to talk about the things that displeased him at the Versailles court.
Whether it was the doctors, whether it was the nobility, whether it was the king. But the way he did it was discreet. He didn't just say...
Subtle.
Yes. He didn't just say the king is bad or the king is this.
He couldn't do it, right?
course
Because
not.
the king was his patron.
Of course.
So he needed to say what he means and mean what he says, but in a subtle way.
Yes.
what has he used?
Satire and literary devices.
Completely.
Just as Orwell is doing.
So he used animals. Now, if the king would consider himself to be an animal, that's a problem, right? Okay. So he used animals. Now, Orwell does the same. The story of Animal Farm. It's on a farm, manor farm. Humans are ruling, humans are managing. But one day what happens?
One day what happens, there's this old pig.
Yes.
This pig named Old Major. Now, Old Major, because Animal Farm is an allegory of the Soviet, or the communist revolution, the Bolshevik revolution.
Yes.
We can say Old Major represents those big theorists. Karl Marx, the theorist, the
Who
progeny.
dreamed
Yes,
about a better future
Yes.
between...
amongst the animals,
yes.
amongst the proletariat. We could say Old Major represents Karl Marx, the theorist, and Lenin, the man who instigated the revolution. Why? Because Old Major has a dream. He has a dream where it is revealed to him, look, every animal produces something. The sheep produce wool, you know? The chickens produce eggs. The pigs produce pork.
And what does the human do? He
The
manages.
The human,
Manages the work.
but according to Old Major, the human produces nothing.
Yes, but he's the manager of the work. He gives the work.
Yes.
He limits the work. And he has a role basically of... the human is a project manager.
The human is a project manager, but Karl Marx would say that the human is a bourgeois. Karl Marx had the same critique of the bourgeois as Old Major has of the humans, which is they don't have any precise, tangible, material, physical production output.
Yes.
You know, they just manage. Or in other words, they extract the wealth, which is what Karl Marx said about the bourgeois. Those are simply the people that manage and own the production means, but don't produce anything themselves. Right?
Completely.
And so,
Anything tangible, right?
yes.
So, there are
Which,
always
if
in
I might,
theory.
if I
Yeah,
might
please do.
interject, is ironic because Karl Marx himself was a bourgeois. Karl Marx never worked in a factory. Karl Marx never worked in a farm. Karl Marx was simply an erudite, an intellectual, who was sponsored by his friend Friedrich Engels.
He had the time and the leisure to think about
Exactly.
the condition of humankind.
Exactly.
Right?
Continue.
Now, Animal Farm, as you said, Old Major had a dream. He wanted animals to be equal
Yes.
in his dream, and then he died. Then, the ideas of Old Major were taken by two pigs, Napoleon
And Snowball.
and Snowball. It's really interesting. So the first pig's name is Napoleon, right? Now, most people and many scholars would assume that Orwell was talking about Stalin at the time, right? But we can always work out a certain dichotomy, a certain parallelism,
Yes.
a certain parallelism between Stalin and Napoleon. Why? Well, we could say, as the story progresses, you're going to understand that Snowball and Napoleon would simply recycle the ruling class and take the place of the ruling class as Napoleon did, right?
In France.
We can say that Napoleon, even in the whole of Europe, right?
Yes.
Napoleon used to fight in the name of les idées des Lumières, the ideas of enlightenment.
Yes.
And he then replaced the aristocracy and the ruling elite by putting in place his own family and his protégés. In Sweden, you have Bernadotte, one is of his marshals, whose family is still ruling the country. You have the Joachim Murat, who was the king of Naples.
Yes.
His brother Joseph was king of Spain. So in French, we used to say Napoleon used to make kings like we used to make corporals.
That's a beautiful expression.
Completely, and
But it speaks to that theme of recycling the aristocracy.
exactly, recycling the ruling class. So the story goes by Snowball and Napoleon would start thinking between themselves that maybe we could change the sociological and political apparel and modus operandi of the farm.
Maybe there is a political order which is more just than the current one.
Yes.
And how does Old Major die? Old Major is killed by the farmer, Farmer Joe, I think.
Yes.
Farmer Joseph or something. Because one day he returns from the pub or something, extraordinarily drunk, and he slaughters a couple of animals, which I understand that as being an expression of the decadence and the consumerism of the upper class, who negate their responsibilities and defer themselves to consumerism and consumption. So the farmer returns, slaughters Old Major, and forgets to feed the animals. which I view that as being analogous to the drought which preceded the Bolshevik Revolution, that famine, that condition of famine which
Completely.
agitated people's passions to revolt against their leadership.
Hard times, hard material times would bring up revolutions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what would happen is that Snowball and Napoleon would convince the other animals. So you have sheep, you have a horse, and you have other kinds of animals. You have
there's
chickens.
But the sheep and the horse are the most significant.
Yes. Now, what would happen is that the two pigs, Snowball and Napoleon, would convince the other animals to have an uprising. And the uprising begins, it happens, and it succeeds. So the farmer is chased out of the farm, and the pigs take over the management of the farm. Now, you could say it's great. The animals have won. The old master, who was a complete tyrant, and let's remember what's the definition of tyrant. It's a man who rules according to the Greeks, but he's not a king. What's the difference between a tyrant and a king? I'm reading a book called La Cité Antique, the Antique City by...
You've been telling me about how great that book is.
By Fustel de Coulanges. So Fustel de Coulanges is the biggest expert on Hellenism and of the classics in France. It was written at the end of the 19th century, and he explains how the Greeks used to call a tyrant a man who was a king without being the protector of the rituals. So a king had a sacred, we could say, aura for others. The king was not only the military commander, he was the high priest. The tyrant was the military commander and the manager of the society.
Without being the high priest.
Without being the high priest, right? It's like the papacy. You have the papacy and you have a king in the Middle Ages, right? But the king and the papacy were not one. And that's what an emperor is, right?
Yes.
Anyways, so the tyrant is basically the one who rules without having that religious, spiritual
the
aura.
Moral.
Exactly.
You know, the leader should be the best of that people group.
Completely.
He should exemplify every value, custom, tradition, behavior of that people group. But a tyrant doesn't.
He should have the upper moral values.
People should look to the leader and say that is what we should aspire to be.
Completely. So we could say that the tyrant is gone, the human is gone, right? So the pigs will start managing the farm. Now, slowly but surely, you can notice that first of all, the pigs will start introducing a certain constitution, right? No animal can sleep on sheets, no animal can live like a human.
No animal can drink alcohol, things like that.
Yes.
We often notice that sometimes political changes need some moral justification to support them. And this is what Orwell is getting at. There's 7 animal commandments, and these are often joined by some slogans. For example, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad.
Yes.
And we see in these days more and more a lot of political slogans. I'm not going to name them, but oftentimes they serve to produce a simplification of the politics without providing a direct and pragmatic policy approach to actually affect change.
Completely. Like nowadays, you know how both of us, right? I would assume, we don't really like the left, right. I mean, we adhere to certain ideas. We have a quite understandable, as our viewers might notice, view of politics, right? So we're more about balance than taking a side blindly.
We're more about unity rather than separation.
Completely. So we believe that a good balanced society starts with leaders who firstly and mostly are themselves, psychologically and in their lives and private affairs, balance themselves. So we can see that the pigs start introducing constitutions into the lives of the animals to basically manage the life of the farm. But, as you said, no alcohol, no sheets in the beds. Animals can't live like humans, right? Because we need to repudiate humans.
We need to distance ourselves from that previous political order, which we have just displaced. You find this often in revolutions.
Completely. So what happens is that with time, first of all, the cows were not milked for a day. So they were full of milk. And the pigs said to the other animals, don't worry, we'll take care of that. So all of that creamy milk that came was taken by the pigs themselves. Now, the milk disappeared.
So they harvested the milk, But the pigs kept it for themselves.
And we noticed afterwards, well, the animals noticed, that the milk was drunken up by the pigs themselves.
The pigs were getting fat.
Plus, the apples were reserved to the pigs. So the pigs had the milk, the apples. Now, as the story goes on, what can we notice in the attitude of the pigs?
We notice more and more that they begin to resemble the humans which they replaced. That initial constitution which was established eventually gets more and more modified to make exceptions. But what type of exceptions? Exceptions which are favorable to the decadence of the pigs.
Yes. So we can see that the constitution's, right, as any constitution's basics, is to manage society rightly and to make everybody, we would say, accountable by the same rules. Now, all is playing on words, right? Lenin used to say, teach them the word, they're going to learn the thing. So, 4 legs, good, 2 legs, bad. Meaning, animals are good, humans are bad. But, with time passing, apples and milk are for the pigs. The pigs, with time again, would distribute the work, as humans used to do. So, their argument would be, us pigs, we need the milk, we need the apples. Why? Because we're managing the farm. We cannot work because without us, the work wouldn't even be distributed.
Yes, we need that sustenance in order to lead and manage the farm. We need to collect these resources. Don't worry, our robbery of your production output is justified because we, the pigs, we are just and noble leaders, you know. We need that in order to sustain our managerial talents, without which this farm would fall into decay. This is how the pigs attempt to justify it.
We have a higher and more superior moral output than yourselves.
The pigs use morality to justify their consumption, to justify their
privileges.
Their privileges,
Completely. Yes. That's the word. The privileges.
Yes.
Because now the pigs, as the human, right, has privileges. And we can see that, right, in Napoleon's, we could say Napoleon Bonaparte, not Napoleon the pig. Napoleon Bonaparte, in the name of, again, the ideas of enlightenment, decided to change the political order, but slowly but surely. Like, he had the privileges of the old aristocracy until the time of his coronation, right? Yes. Napoleon was sacred emperor. Well, now, some might argue that that was a must imposed by him, by Talleyrand, his foreign minister.
Yes.
Because he needed to operate in a certain scenery on the whole European continent, which was based on divine right, on rule by divine right. So, the pigs themselves had instaured a constitution that privileged them. Now, with time, the pigs started to sleep in the manner of the farm, in the house. They moved in the house of the human. They started reading the newspaper. They started, honestly, to act like human beings.
They started drinking, started eating breakfast, started clothing themselves.
Let's talk about drinking. It's really interesting. There's a part where a horse, which is a noble creature, right?
The horse's name is Boxer.
Boxer. And Boxer is a horse. The horse has always been considered as being a noble creature.
Because who rides on the horse? It is the knight. The horse is a loyal animal to his master. The horse labors and tries hard. The horse never fatigues. So the horse, why would Orwell represent the working people with the horse? He's representing this character of nobility. He's representing this character of devotion to a higher purpose. The horse may not think for itself. It may not have that supreme intellect that the human has. But the horse recognizes, by being joined with its master, it is serving a high purpose. And that's why that horse, Boxer, labors so hard, right? And I like the name Boxer too. Boxer is a very appropriate name. Because if you look, you might look at the martial artists of today and think they have big egos, but it's always been the case. If you're in the ring and competing and there's high-end physical consequences on the line, you must have some ego in the name of protection, right? Boxer means nobility. No warriors have always been the most meritocratic and the most noble people. And it is the way that Boxer, this horse, expresses his meritocracy and his nobility is through his labors. He finds that through his intense labor, he is able to better the entire political community, the entire farm at large.
The entire society, completely.
Yes.
And Boxer was the more adamant individual in the farm to change the political order.
Yes,
He was
while
the-
everyone else was sleeping, while all the other animals were sleeping, Boxer was at work. Boxer labeled through his injuries, Boxer labeled through his fatigue, through everything in the name of the farm.
So Boxer was the most hardworking individual in the farm in the name and for the sake of political change, because he truly believed in the words of the pigs. And Boxer became old. He worked hard. He was the main actor in that political change, as we've said. And what happened is that the pigs decided to take care of Boxer. So they told the sheep, of course, we forgot to mention the sheep. The sheep are very interesting because when the pigs instaured the rule that...
La 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 la, yalla, yalla.
Tempo, piano, piano. Wait. Okay. So when the pigs started to implement that constitution, which its main basis is 4 legs, good, 2 legs, bad, meaning animals are good and human beings are bad, well, the sheep started to scream throughout the farm, oh, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. They just repeat what the power says.
They were the porte-parole, as we might say in French, the spokespeople.
Exactly.
Right?
For free, right?
For free. The sheep are the people that are willingly accepting of the high, I don't want to say high end, but of the political dogma which emanates from the upper class.
Completely. So the sheep played a crucial part in the spiritual propaganda
Yes.
of the pigs, which served them well. And we can see that when the Boxer, let's go back to Boxer, became old, well, the pigs said, don't worry, we're going to take care of him. We're going to send him into a nice house where he can spend the rest of his life. But what happened is that the pigs called a man specialized in animals butchering. He killed the horse, bought his meat, and the pigs earned a lot of money from the most hard-working individual in the farm, which, in my opinion, represents the people.
Yes.
And they earned money. So the pigs earned money from the most hard-working individual of the farm, which represents the common people, in order to buy whiskey.
That's ridiculous.
Quite ironically.
Let's
remember that alcohol is banned for the animals.
Yes, according to their constitution. Look at what the pigs did. They took their most noble, most adroit, most hard-working asset, the horse, Boxer, noble, the one who was most devoted to the change in the political order and the success of the community.
We could even say he's a patriot.
He is a patriot.
He's a patriot.
Exactly. Boxer is the one that loves his community, loves the symbols, and works hard to see their ultimate success. And what did the leadership, the pigs, do with Boxer? They butchered him. They slaughtered him.
They crucified Boxer on the altar of their petty and individualistic interests.
They turned him into glue, and with the funds they bought whiskey to drunken themselves.
Exactly, that's what happens in the story, right?
Yes.
They sell him to turn him into glue, then to buy whiskey, to get drunk.
Yes,
to take
their most noble worker.
To take part in their decadence.
Yes.
In the name of justice and of equity.
So they are simply repeating the same pattern, the same cycle, which the farmer Joseph was doing as well.
Completely.
Remember,
killing animals.
Old Major, the pig that was the progenitor of this revolution, of this political change, was slaughtered, was the victim to the decadence of the farmer. Now, Boxer is the victim to the decadence of the pigs.
Now, there's something interesting that happens between the two pigs, right?
Snowball and Napoleon.
Exactly.
Go on. Yes.
What happens between Snowball and Napoleon?
So we've been talking about Boxer, and he's been working hard. Snowball decides to build a windmill, right?
Yes.
And Boxer works very hard towards the construction of this windmill. But before that even, Napoleon notices that Snowball is maybe a bit more charismatic. Or
yes.
Not even charismatic, but we may say more clever, more witty, and more convincing.
Yes.
Right? And because of that, Snowball is able to get more of the animals on his side towards the construction of a windmill. Now, who does Snowball represent in the real life?
We could say the meritocratic individual.
Scholars would say it is Leon Trotsky. So Snowball represents Leon Trotsky, this intellectual that still is clinging on to that idealistic utopian vision of what the farm can be, what the political community can be, right? But Snowball, Napoleon notices that Snowball is getting more of the animals on his side. So what Napoleon does is he assembles this small mercenary army of dogs to hunt after Snowball, excuse me. And what this represents in real life is the eventual exile of Leon Trotsky. Now, in real life, Trotsky goes and moves to Mexico, and he has an affair with Frida Kahlo.
Yes.
But the book doesn't go into that detail. George Orwell doesn't go into that level of detail. Unfortunately, there's a lot of literary substance that's missed out there, dramatic substance, if you ask me. But it represents how Trotsky is eventually exiled and excommunicated.
You know what we could even say? Napoleon executed the Duke of Enghien. The Duke of Enghien was a royalist who Napoleon executed. He was the last remnant of the old regime. He was like a contestant to the throne of France, of the House of France.
Yeah.
And we could even say that the pig needs to be the only pig who could assert his domination over the animal affairs by being human. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean?
Right. I know what you mean.
Yes.
But then again, what I want to get to at this is that after Snowball is expelled,
yes,
there's another pig in the leadership apparatus named Squealer.
Yes.
And Squealer is saying, "Oh, don't worry. Snowball was a traitor anyway. We have exiled him. Yada yada yada."
So Squealer is the one who rewrites history.
And you know what Squealer represents?
Tell me.
He represents media and propaganda.
Completely.
Specifically, in the case of the USSR and the Bolshevik Revolution, he represents the magazine Pravda. Pravda was the main propaganda arm of the USSR. Even Mikhail Gorbachev, in that end period of the USSR, would write articles for Pravda. But Squealer, and I like the name Squealer a lot, I'll tell you why, but Squealer represents the media and propaganda arm. Why do I like the name Squealer? It's because squealing, maybe the French audience may not know this word as much, but squealing is like making noise, like imagine a pig.
Yes.
Excuse me for the sounds I just made, but imagine a pig squealing, you know? It's the sound a pig makes, right? And
yes.
you know, so it's noise sometimes. I can't recall the author, but somebody said propaganda is the technique where we overwhelm the audience with information such that they cannot receive a precise image of the reality.
Yes.
Right? Like a pig squealing within a farm, like a pig squealing amongst other pigs. And you know, to be honest, I look at some of the personalities which prevail, not only on mainstream media, but especially on social media, and I cannot distinguish them from the squealing of a pig.
Like, yeah, you could say that inundation, that tsunami of information, especially like the ones giving us information about the political scene, about the news, right? That whole diversification and multitude of scenarios presented to us by influencers nowadays is getting people lost and afraid,
overwhelmed
of the future.
We could even say it's a shock tactic of media
Yes.
to overwhelm people of information.
Yes, yes. And it's a certain form of manipulation used by, I wouldn't say the power, or I wouldn't say
One second, I just want to check if we're filming or not, are we?
Yes. What? We're not filming, Nikita?
We are filming. It's a certain form of manipulation used by the power, media, Squealer.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yes, like Squealer is the one who is rewriting history. And as Napoleon, not the pig, Napoleon Bonaparte used to say, history is just a set of lies.
That are agreed upon.
Completely. Mm-hmm. And in that case, that's how we could define Squealer's story.
Yes.
Yes, so, okay. So his main, we would say, nemesis has been...
defeated, exiled.
Defeated and exiled. And, okay, and now there's just Napoleon.
But I want to make the distinction between Napoleon and Snowball.
Yes.
Snowball relies on his scholarship. Snowball relies on the fact that he is clever, on the fact that he is intellectual and erudite and learned.
Yes.
The fact that Orwell used the name of Napoleon to depict a pig that was representing Stalin is because of the fact that both of these men relied on force. Both of these men believed in a philosophy that might made right. Would you agree? Or
I would say that there was that big propaganda since the fall of Napoleon in the late 19th century, right?
What propaganda?
Let's be honest, right? We're in the middle of the 20th century. The fall of Napoleon wasn't such a long time ago, right? So we could say that that whole propaganda of the perfidious Albion, as they could be called by continental powers at the time, was really against Napoleon, right? So Orwell might have inspired his story by comparing Stalin to Napoleon, right?
A man who believes on might makes right.
Exactly, exactly. And the recycling of the ruling class to, at the end, right, the communists, les Jacobins, the Jacobins, at the end, they just wanted to take power, not in order to have equality and freedom, but just by resentment, as Nietzsche would say. Yes. The masses have resentment.
For their masters.
Exactly. And they have resentment, and in the name of justice and of greater virtues, greater qualities and moral values, they want to have a revolution, but a revolution that would end up in the instauration of the exact same, but under new, of course, auspices, under new values and moral terms.
Perfect.
Be the exact same powers, right? Let's be honest. The Russian aristocracy and the Communist Party, right? Like they have the same methods. Instead, one is based on God.
And one is based on finance.
And I could say on equality, right? One comes from the top, one comes from below. But still, it's the same modus operandi, the same mode of operating.
Yes. Let's look at that word revolution.
Yes.
You know? Revolution doesn't just mean a change of the political order. It doesn't just... The word revolution means, think about it, 360 degrees to make a revolution. And 360 degrees means you are back in the space where you began.
Yes.
Right? And that is exactly what took place on Animal Farm. At first it was that human corpus that was oppressing the animals. But then, by the course of this revolution, they simply displaced the humans, but it is now the pigs which have come to resemble the humans and are yet again oppressing the other animals on the farm.
Yes.
In that sense, it is truly a revolution because it has gone 360 degrees. It has returned to that initial political order of oppression.
Completely. But at the end of the novel, we can see that Napoleon, after banishing his nemesis Snowball, had literally established a political order. Let's remember, he's living in the house of the human, whom he banished because he was oppressive. He's reading the same newspapers as the human. He's wearing the glasses of the human.
And the clothing.
And the clothing. He's eating, drinking, and now we're at the step of the novel where Snowball starts walking on 2 feet. Let's remember.
Napoleon starts walking on 2 feet.
Napoleon, excuse me. So let's remember, what's in the Constitution? What's the main basis of the Constitutions? 4 feet, good. 2 feet, bad. And who repeats it? Who are the agents of the power in place? The sheep. So now, because Snowball has taken all the apparel, the appearances, the
customs
habits of
the human.
Well, there needs to be a change in the Constitution, right? So, what happens now? 2 feet is now good. 4 feet is now submissive.
And you know, at the frontispiece of the Animal Farm, there was a slogan. We were talking earlier about the significance of slogans, the significance of certain political catchphrases.
It's a simplified.
There was one which said, all animals are equal. That's how it began in the Constitution.
Yes.
They laid out those 7 commandments,
and then
7 cardinal virtues, 7 cardinal sins. There were 7 commandments of the Animal Farm, one of which was all animals are equal. Though by the end of the
But
story...
wait, little by little,
Yes.
the constitution changed and became
They made modifications.
all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
And that is a devastating blow. That is...
That's the slow creation of a privileged class,
Yes.
of a new aristocracy. Let's
dig into that.
let's dig into that.
There's many ways we can interpret that.
Let's go back to the context of the Cold War. The communists, in the name of the people, of the working people, according to the ideas of Marx, wanted to make everybody equal and stuff, but it didn't impeach them and prevent them from creating an aristocracy.
Yes.
The Soviet Politburo, the Pravda,
The oligarchy.
was an oligarchy, right?
Yes.
So let's dig into the management of power. Do we always need an oligarchy? Like even Napoleon, right?
That's
Napoleon wanted meritocracy. He got meritocracy, but let's be honest, for a certain time, right? For a certain time, until the time his family members and friends became powerful enough to have thrones, right?
yes.
So is it necessary to always have a privileged class? Is that always necessary?
This has been one of the big questions in democratic theory. It's, are the mass of people talented, virtuous enough to actually run that state? I have a book on my shelf over there that really deals with those questions. But this question has, and it's not up to us to answer right now, but this question has been bothering democratic theorists of democracy, for a long time. And even Aristotle and Plato, who lived in that democratic Athens, which was renowned for its cultural output, they were the fruits of the democratic Athens. They said, hold on, this democracy stuff, it's susceptible to some certain dangers. You know, the ship is like the state is like a sailing ship. And while everybody might like to have their hands on the helm, it takes a certain talent. One man has to be a navigator. One man has to be learned in cultures. One man has to actually know how to steer the ship. Democracy, then, is a system where we place the rowers, the oarmen, at the helm of the ship, but not specifically the rowers. A majoritarian coalition of the rowers, which is then vulnerable to fragmentations of that coalition, which is then susceptible to things like propaganda, media, messaging. So then, is it necessary to have an aristocratic class? I would like to then bring this to the question, which I hear this question a lot in conversations of Animal Farm. Does absolute, let me say this one more time. Does absolute power corrupt absolutely? This is a question that many people ponder about. And again, it's not for us to figure out.
Let's go back to the prince.
I wanted to go back to the
Let's
prince.
go back to the prince. The interest of the state must be personified into an individual interest. But the interest of the prince, your interest, for example, your personal interest is not aligned with the interest of the state. But the personal interest of the government is aligned with the interest of the whole nation.
It should be.
Well, the prince at the time was the government himself, right?
Singular and personified.
So the personal interest of the prince, because it was a hereditary regime,
yes,
was aligned with his personal interest was aligned with the interest of the common people. And let's be honest, in that book I'm reading, Fustel de Coulanges,
La Cité Antique.
the antique city,
Yes.
it talks about that cycle. You know why I love that author? Because he discusses the evolution of society, not through years, through generations. He's like, an aristocracy might develop itself, but that aristocracy would be supplanted by people who would engage into commerce. Like the aristocracy relies on the land, the farming land, but the people who work and live in big cities rely on commerce, on trade and international trade, so they could be more wealthy than the aristocrat, and they replace them. And then it becomes a cycle. It's a cycle, right? But that cycle needs to be ordered. What orders that cycle? You know why kings were, first of all, put into power, given power, and you know by whom? by the people. The king was the one protecting the common people from
their own disorder.
The aristocrats. From the aristocrats.
Yes.
The king, in French, we say, le roi est le premier des derniers et le dernier des premiers. The king is the first of the last.
And the last of the first.
And the last of the firsts. The king is the first among the common people and the last among the aristocrats.
That's beautiful.
The king is the one who protects the interests of the common people against the aristocrats. The king wants to destroy the power of the aristocrats because it demeans his own power. And how does he destroy the power of the aristocrats?
By augmenting the power of the common people.
Completely. Completely. By elevating the common people. For example, there's an aristocrat who bothers him. What does he do? He takes a common man who has distinguished himself through honorary values, through services rendered to the crown or through military prowess, and he makes them a duke or a baron.
Yes.
And that is how he has replaced the dissident aristocrat, who was a threat against himself and the crown.
Because if you are a king, the aristocrat is seeking your throne.
Completely. Completely. So I would believe that the king is a factor of order.
Yes.
It's a fact, because human beings, the aristocrats are here, the common people would replace the aristocrats slowly. It's always turning. Tables, when people say tables have turned? Well, literally, society turns always. But there needs to be a single temporal man who is always here to supervise it. You see? And that creates order.
Beautiful.
And let's be honest, right? In the Bible it says that les premiers seront les derniers et les derniers seront les premiers. The firsts will be last and the last will be the firsts.
I've heard that before, yes.
So, when, for example, in the Catholic faith, right? God is omnipotent. God is present and rules the affairs of men.
Omnipotent, omniprescient, and omnicognizant.
Completely. So how does that's in the spiritual part it's in the minds of men. Okay? Now on the political scene, how does that translate itself? Well, the king rules in the affairs of men. The king is omnipotent, it's a hereditary role, and the king is not subdued to a constitution. Now, for example, in the British monarchy, that is based on Protestantism, right? An Anglican version of Protestantism, of course, that relies more on symbolism.
Yes.
Protestantism says that God is omnipotent, but God doesn't intervene in the affairs of men. The king is omnipotent, but he doesn't interfere in the affairs of men. The king is subdued to a constitution. The king needs to work according to a constitution, and he does not interfere into politics. So what is spiritual...
Because he's above politics.
He's above politics. But as you can see, that what is spiritual would eventually translate itself into being political. You see? If the king rules by absolutism, by divine right, while God, in the minds of people, rules and is omnipotent. He rules in the affairs of men. But if the king is subdued and is constrained by a constitution, then, according to the Protestant mind, the salute comes from a personal endeavor. So, there is no centralization of power, but God is omnipotent, but he does not intervene into the affairs of men. The king is bowed to silence in the affairs of men in front of parliament.
Through a constitution.
Exactly.
Yes.
So what is spiritual translates itself into being political.
What is spiritual becomes political.
Completely.
We were just talking about that phrase. At the end of the novel, they change all animals are equal. And they change it to say all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yes.
What that really lets us know is that what it reminds us of, at least, what it reminds us of, is that words are symbols. Words are symbols. Words are some auditory and literary vessels for us to apply some meaning unto. They are a sign.
Let us notice that the first steps into changing the constitution was changing the words people used.
Yes.
Let us notice that, first of all, the words of the constitution have been changed in order to change the political structure. And let's not forget that words, the liberty of expression, freedom of speech, is not only freedom of speech, but it's freedom of thought.
Freedom of thought. If words are symbols, and if we do believe that language shapes thought, then it does mean that by modifying language, by modifying the meaning of these words, these symbols, we can modify the way that people think.
Think. Lénine, apprenez-leur le mot, teach them the word, vous leur apprendrez la chose. You will teach them the thing.
Yes. It regrettably is the case that oftentimes language and words are the first victims of oppressive and totalitarian regimes.
Completely.
Language and words are the first victims of oppressive and totalitarian regimes for the reasons we have just espoused, because they change people's thoughts, they change people's meanings. And when we think of that slogan, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, we are reminded that words are symbols. They are auditory vessels to which we apply meaning.
You know, Jesus used to say that the kingdom of heaven is within you, right?
That's a saying we really reflect on in this salon.
It's like Yuval Noah Harari
Yes.
in Sapiens.
Yes.
He used to say that human beings are tied by an inner kingdom that they cultivate
Among themselves.
Right? Why would a stranger from the north of a country fight with another stranger from the south of that same country in order to save the other stranger from the east of that country? Because they have the same inner kingdom. They have the same storytellings, the same myths, and that translates into a religion. It's like
the same
us.
understanding.
It's like us, right?
Like you and me.
I said myth, you said myth.
At
We
the
have
same
the same
time.
inner kingdom. That's why we're
And that inner
able,
kingdom is emblemized by the Friday Salon.
and that is why we are able to cooperate. We have approximately the same kingdom, the inner kingdom, and that is why we are able to cooperate. And that is why we are able to achieve, to create, to form, to construct, to build.
Yes.
And that is why we are able to innovate. So innovation starts with the creation of a new kingdom. Now, if you want to change...
And the creation of a new kingdom begins with the freedom of expression.
Completely.
Freedom of expression results in innovation, clashing of ideas, and progress.
Why? Because freedom of expression is first of all freedom of thought.
Yes.
You need to be able to think whatever you want to think. And when you think something, you either say to yourself or you say to the world. You either fight the world or fight yourself.
Yes.
It is always better to fight the world, of course, in a civilized and in a way that is completely subdued to decorum
And just.
and to civilization.
Yes.
But it is always to express what you have to say instead of just containing it. Because at a certain...
And allowing it to unleash in more vicious forms at a later point.
Completely.
Like Nietzsche said,
Completely.
the bellicose man, in times of peace, wages war against himself.
Completely.
Yes.
That is why it's really important for people, especially nowadays, to express themselves through many ways. Art, readings, writings,
Literature.
YouTube videos in a salon, in a nice and incredible setting, talking about philosophy, culture, art, charisma, making money. For example, like we could have, for example, two young, ambitious, and hardworking men.
What can I say?
Imagine, let's just imagine two hard and ambitious working men who have all of those ideas, who are versed with the greatest minds of humankind. Mm-hmm. Like, should they keep that to themselves or should they spread it?
It's our gift to you.
I'm just saying, I'm just asking myself that
Not that
question.
it's our gift, but they should gift it.
They should gift it, right? Like, them reading all of those books, those great minds, and putting themselves, because reading is literally spiritual workout.
It's a workout for the mind. You are importing the thoughts of a great man.
And let's be honest, nowadays, Most young men do not read. They prefer to listen to influencers who talk about success, who talk about making money, who talk about some idea or some plan they have for you to be rich.
They use some catchphrases, some slogans, some words you can identify
But
with.
let us go back to the essentials, right? Nothing is new under the sun.
Nothing.
Marcus Aurelius. Everything that you have been asking yourself has been answered already by the greatest minds that we have read. Not all of them, of course, with all humility.
We're on our way. We're still young.
But some of them. So it's our pleasure not just to give you some catchy sentences for you to keep clicking and clicking, giving us attention so we can monetize it. I won't lie to you, that's our goal. But still, we have a greater purpose, which is to make men think again. We want men to think for themselves because men are the future, young men are the future. Our civilization is based on the free will of the people, and
Yes.
an educated people is an informed people. Then it's strong, informative, and wise decisions based on the greatest minds of history. And by that we are serving not only ourselves and our pockets, that's our goal, let's not lie to ourselves, but we are saving our nation, our people, and especially the common good. And by that we are having an incredible impact.
By serving ourselves, we are serving you.
Just like the prince, we are aligning our common interests with the interest of the people.
As it should be, as it ought to be. This is the destiny of every noble man, to unite his own efforts with the success of his own group.
Most people think that doing your own interest must necessarily be
something selfish.
Yes.
Something perverted even.
But you can always align your common interest with your personal interest with the common good of the people.
Yes.
And that is what we are thriving to do with all humility and all honesty. Your knowledge, our money. Your pleasure, our treasure.
My brother. Oh, jeez.
That is incredible. Well, let's wrap it up.
Yes. We find that when we say things like all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, we are reminded that words are symbols, and that words can be subject to catchphrases. You know, words can be turned into buzzwords, and buzzwords can be turned into simplifications which mean that you don't have to think by your own self. You can just accept what is. It is turning language into baby food. You know, the baby doesn't have its own teeth yet, so it has to eat the mushed food. Don't allow that to happen to your own mind. You know,
Queen Elizabeth I used to say that the Bible is for the elites and the worshipping of statues is for the common people. That is a certain way to say, right? Because back in those days, in the medieval times, the Bible was a political program.
Instead to produce unity, to produce
completely
order, stability.
Completely.
Yes.
Like it was a certain way of explaining that we don't need to explain the common people the whole Bible word by word. Especially, let's remember that in those days it was just in Latin. There was no English translation.
Yes.
We can just simplify it by presenting statues.
Yes.
And that is what slogans used in political campaigns. For example, let's not give names, of course. Let's remember we're apolitical.
We're just literaries.
We don't believe in ideologies.
Nope.
We believe in interests, the interest of a nation, the interest of a people. The best way to keep them united, to keep them effective, competitive, and especially to create wealth and health. So, Queen Elizabeth I used to believe that statues are a simplified way to explain the Bible. As politicians would believe that slogans are a simplified way to explain large and complex political topics that would be, in another case, harder to explain.
To the common mass. You nailed it. You got it perfectly, man.
That's what happens when I stay with you. I just nail everything. I just win.
I win when I'm with you.
When you're surrounded by winners, you win. It's simple.
It's straightforward.
Voila.
It follows.
It's simple.
It doesn't need explanation. We are statues and we worship each other.
Cheers.
My brother. Cheers to you.
The Friday Salon.
Cheers to the Friday Salon.
Incredible.
We've espoused a lot of wisdom today.
Yes.
We've looked at that short book. By the way, we've made this podcast, but don't be deceived. Animal Farm is a short book. It's like 95 pages or so, depending on the edition you get. But we have them linked in the description of this YouTube video. It's a short book with a lot of wisdom, a good portion of which we have dispelled today. But if there is an essential fact which we might derive from Animal Farm, from George Orwell, what could we say it is?
I would say that be always cautious when somebody, in the name of justice, equality, of a certain higher moral value, induces you to create disorder, uses you to create disorder and to change the political spectrum, the political order. Because let us remember, order creates freedom, disorder creates chaos. And let's remember that to rule, there are certain prerequisites that are already in place. The main value should be unity. Unity to be competitive on a world stage. Before getting divided, before having ideologies, let our nations, our civilizations act as a one, simplified, and united body.
That is how the community thrives. It is not, the community does not thrive when one person says, I am the boss, or I am the boss, or the other one is the boss. The nation thrives when it says the nation is the boss.
Who's the boss between you and I? We are two individuals.
There's Carl, there is Nikita. Neither of
Who's
us
the
are
boss?
the boss. The boss is the Friday Salon.
What defines our policies?
The Friday Salon.
The interests of the Friday Salon.
Which is the moral and personal edification and education
Competitiveness.
of you, the viewer.
We are political science students. We have read those books, and we're just sharing them with you to tell you honestly a simple message. Do not get fooled by people who, in the name of a higher interest, use you to make money. We are using you so we could have views, so we can monetize the channel. Let's be honest. But our main goal, other than filling our purse, is to have an impact. We're aligning our personal interest with the common interest of the young men, women, and individuals who are completely lost in that world full of information and diversification of thoughts. So, what can we learn from Animal Farm?
Be cautious of ideology. Be cautious of slogans. Be cautious of those people who produce moral justifications to better themselves.
Do not be the horse who works hard for somebody else's dream and at the end gets sold and killed.
And turn into glue.
To
fund whiskey.
Exactly.
Don't be that.
Be the one who decides to preserve order. Be the one who decides and understands that order creates freedom.
Freedom creates progress. Freedom creates expression.
Innovation. And let us remember that freedom of speech is freedom of thought. You've even taught me a lot.
As you have taught to me.
Like, as iron sharpens iron.
Brother sharpens brother. Man sharpens man.
Voila.
Voila. Voila. Wait, before we play the music and we have that beautiful outro, we just want to remind you, if this video has piqued your interest, if this video has inspired you to look more deeply into things like slogans, propaganda, or even this beautiful book by George Orwell, a short book, nevertheless, Animal Farm, something like 97 pages, we have it linked in our description. The path between you and your personal edification is the link in our bio. We've attached some of our most favorite editions of George Orwell's works. We would highly recommend that you click on them, you read them, you absorb them. Not for our sake, but for your own sake. For the sake that you might improve yourself. And that is our mission.
Because remember, in a democracy, you are the one who rules.
In a democracy, the strength of the democracy is the strength of the citizens.
Vote. And to vote, be informed.
Yes.
Be informed and think for yourself. Do not let propaganda propagate their ideas in order to have their personal interests. Think of the interests of your nation, of your people, of your civilization.
Of your family and of your community at large.
Completely. And on that, I say, Cheers to you, my friend. The Friday Salon.
Long live the Friday Salon. Long live our viewers who watch.
Always.
Because those of you who click on our videos, you're clicking on these videos because you want to learn.
You have taken a decision.
And to that we're drinking to ourselves, we're drinking to the salon, we're drinking to our viewers as well. Yes, it's me and Carl sitting together, but it's also you sitting along with us and listening. You're on for the ride. You're here with us. And might I say voila?
Well, voila.
Voila.
Right? Voila, it was great.
Voila.
Voila. Voilà, 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 voilà qui je suis. Et voilà mes amis. Aujourd'hui c'est fini. C'est la 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 la.